So welcome to our session this afternoon, and this is session 5 of our kindergarten drop-in sessions. Évaluation de milieu de l'année, suivi des progrès et enseignement en petits groupes. And Angeline and I are both joining you from the Weston Harbor Castle as we are kicking off the OMLTA conference. So I'm going to take a moment for our reconnaissance des terres. Nous reconnaissons que le travail d'ONlit se déroule sur des territoires autochtones traditionnels. Nous reconnaissons que 46 traités et autres accords couvrent le territoire qui s'appelle aujourd'hui l'Ontario. Nous sommes reconnaissants de pouvoir travailler sur ces terres et nous sommes reconnaissants envers les Premières Nations, aux Métis et aux Inuits pour les soins qu'ils apportent à ces terres, ainsi que les enseignements qu'ils en tirent. Cette reconnaissance nous rappelle nos responsabilités à l'égard de nos relations et des terres ancestrales sur lesquelles nous apprenons, travaillons et vivons. Alors, bonjour, bon après-midi à tout le monde et bienvenue à notre session. I'm going to pass you over to Angeline for now, and I will see you again during our question time.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. So excited to be here with you today. And as Jordan mentioned, we are joining you from the OMLTA conference. And I know that ages me a little bit more than Jordan because I'm past president and she is past president. So, we're just going. So our agenda for today is we're going to look at our big theme of évaluation de milieu de l'année, suivi des progrès et enseignement en petits groupes. Puis on va vous donner, on va prendre quelques minutes pour des questions-réponses. Puis on va faire un survol des événements qui vont venir pour ONlit. Alors, quand on parle de l'évaluation, je pense que c'est toujours important. It's really important that we want to have that coherent vocabulary when we're talking about the types of evaluation. And I know that I was just saying that in our board, we have some really amazing educators that are truly outstanding and have had a fair amount of PD, but sometimes we because of all of the conversations out there, sometimes we get these words mixed up. So just wanting to make sure that we know that dépistage précoce, when we're talking about those screeners, that is where PPM 168 comes in, that we're using it with all students. Now, we know research says début, milieu, et fin d'année, but we know that PPM 168 says with all students once a year, and then with those students that have results below benchmark, that we're using it a second time. That being said, we're going to talk a little bit about that today as we go through the slides and hopefully in our Q&A about the value of that 3 times a year. And this is kind of like triage at the hospital, right? Like, is there a fever? So just letting us know, is there risk involved? Then we look at those diagnostic assessment tools for those students at risk. And then that really helps us identify where is the need, or why is there a fever? Is it because there's a throat infection? Is it connected to something else? So really helping us look at those specific competencies and areas that require support. And then, of course, the progress monitoring tells us, if we're providing intervention, is it working? And I know sometimes with progress monitoring, because there's progress monitoring, for example, connected to sonograph, but that is like, if you're using it whole class, is that instruction working? But when we're talking about, in this case, we're looking more at that Acadians type progress monitoring, where it's working with those small groups, and is that intervention in that small group working? So when we're looking at middle of year measures, now, of course, with immersion being different across Ontario, I wanted to make sure that we really acknowledge the fact that PPM 168 and the ministry has approved 3 screeners, 1 French screener, and that boards are using a variety of those screeners. So looking at those middle of year measures, whether you're using Acadians, Easy CBM, or Ames Web, and looking at what those measures are at this time in January, February, depending on your board and the way that things have rolled out with those measures, what that timing looks like. But these are the measures that are part of those assessments. So I'm just going to kind of just take a look at, and I know the first slide, we talked a little bit about PPM 168 saying beginning of year, all students. The one thing that I know we have a lot of conversations about is the shift, particularly in kindergarten, in what is measured. So if we look at what is measured at the beginning of the year, we're looking at first sound and letter naming. Whereas middle of year, we're introducing phoneme segmentation and nonsense word fluency. And there are many students that may perhaps have had results that were at benchmark, but that middle of year, we're finding out some different information. The other opportunity, though, is there is so much growth in kindergarten. So it could also be that you have a student that maybe had results that were not at benchmark, that because there has been so much growth, could have results at benchmark middle of year. Just wanting to take a look quickly at the benchmark scores for French immersion. Now, very, very critical that we're looking at those. Now, again, my apologies if you are a board that screens in English, that this is connected directly to Acadians Reading Français, but just wanted to kind of go over. So, for example, if you are using Acadians Reading Français, we're really looking at that facilité à reconnaître le premier son et segmentation des phonèmes. So if we're at or above benchmark, we're looking at 28 first letter sounds. And really, for segmenter les phonèmes, we're looking at 18 or more. So knowing that that student is able to identify the first sound and segment the sounds and words, and that they are likely to achieve important reading outcomes. Students with the results at or above benchmark are likely to need that core support. But students that are below benchmark, so particularly the 13 to 27, sometimes those students are a little harder to predict how they're going to do and know that they may need strategic support. And for students that are well below benchmark, so for example, if we look at facilité à reconnaître le premier son, it's below 13. And then for facilité à segmenter des phonèmes, below 7, those students for sure, we want to ensure they're receiving some intensive support to develop those skills. Facilité à dénommer des lettres, we know that these skills are, sorry, I want to go back to actually when we're talking about le premier son et segmenter des phonèmes, whether you're doing it in French or in English, those skills tend to cross over languages. Whereas when we look at facilité à dénommer des lettres, we know that those are really language specific. So thinking about that and knowing also that letter naming fluency is part of the composite score as an indicator of risk, but there's no benchmark goal and no progress monitoring materials for that, because that's a strong, robust predictor of later reading performance. But we know that it is also not essential to learning to read, but gives us a really important indicator of a young student's alphabet knowledge. Just want to take a look at this for a moment and just knowing, so this is a school with kindergarten, and if we look at that, what do we notice? You may notice that at the beginning of year, 42 students were assessed, and in the middle of year, 30 students were assessed. And that is because some of the students didn't require that second assessment. That being said, we can see that there is a lot of information that may be lost through not doing the middle of year screener. So if we're thinking about the information that the screeners do give us in such a timely way, we really want to know that it's the information it gives us. We're not just strictly looking at who is red, who is yellow, but what are we going to do with that information? So again, looking at the data and how valuable in a quick and timely way the information can be, and knowing even when it comes to groupings, for example, if we only have beginning of year data, knowing that it's really challenging to know that we're using accurate data for this time of year. This is a student-specific example. So looking at this, just wondering if you want to just drop in the chat, what do you notice about the student's results? What do you think might be a possible next step for the student? What are the student's strengths? So we definitely see that this student does have a strong understanding of first sound fluency, but is really working towards that segmenting of sounds beyond that. And in some cases is still working through the first sound being only the first sound and not the consonants that follow. So thinking about how can we use the data to determine our next steps, and knowing that though of course I'm a strong proponent of diagnostic assessment, often because of the measures, particularly with Acadians, we have a lot of specific information already if we are using the middle of year screener that will help us determine where to provide those intervention. And so diagnostics aren't generally required at this stage unless we need a little bit more information about a particular learner. That being said, if you're screening in English, so you know that again, that first sound fluency, there's often a cross-language transfer as well as with phoneme segmentation fluency. However, if it's nonsense word fluency and the results are below benchmark in an English assessment, you may consider using éclair, and that's where you would look at perhaps compétence 5 à 8, which is letter naming, sound naming, as well as early word reading and nonsense word reading. And if you do choose to use éclair, there is this spreadsheet that's available that you can enter the data into for each component, and it will actually support which competence you'd like to develop and the possible progress monitoring you may wish to use to make sure that the intervention is working. So thinking about your next steps and looking at your data. So thinking about what is it that we want to concentrate on? What are the competencies of my students, and what specific areas of growth do I see for my students? Thinking about, is it a whole class need? And is it perhaps just a small group of students that I want to support with a specific need? And I really was reflecting about the kindergarten curriculum for 2026 and looking at the component about just that tiered approach. So thinking about the assessment data helps us plan for that tier 1 instruction, but we may also need further assessment to plan and provide instructional interventions, looking at intensity and support for tier 2 and tier 3. And I really think about those words, intensity and support. It's not that I'm having to find a wealth of other resources. I have the resources, I just need to use them with additional dosage, so that additional intensity and support to really target those skill gaps and accelerate learning for a small group of students or individual students. So thinking about those key components of effective reading interventions just directly from the right to read. So thinking about that at tier 2, knowing that those evidence-based interventions and programs look at those foundational skills and should be consistent with those areas taught in evidence-based tier 1 classroom. So again, going to that additional dosage. So knowing that we want to, tier 2 would be implemented with small groups of students with sufficient time and intensity. And sometimes in kindergarten, we need to use our professional judgment and think about how does that time and intensity vary based on the student that we're working with. And really working towards that outcomes-driven model of understanding who is at risk, what are their needs, how are we going to plan for instruction, and then is it working? That's a key component. And I know I was just recently having a conversation with Jordan about that. Like this is we were really becoming comfortable with the screening and all of these components and diagnostics, and now we're really delving into what is this progress monitoring and how important is it, and understanding how important it is. And if it isn't working, then what do we change? So looking at the screening data from Acadians and what is it that it is using, really looking at when we're looking at grouping the students. So based on the table even from Acadians that looks at, so group 1 is likely to need core support. So we're looking at phonemic awareness and alphabetic principle. Group 2 is looking at alphabetic principle and basic phonics skills. So building those phonemic awareness skills and the alphabetic principle and basic phonics. Group 3 is really looking at additional support on phonemic awareness skills, and Group 4 is receiving additional support on phonemic awareness skills as well as the alphabetic principle and basic phonics skills. And knowing that Group 4 is that group that we want to ensure we find time to target. I know that in our system we've really kind of embraced what is happening or what the supports are provided in next steps in literacy instructions. So really focused on that I do, we do, you do, or I like Anita Archer. Sometimes she'll say I do, we do, we do, we do, you do model, because sometimes that is the intensity of support that's required. Looking at also from that book, just a kind of a general overview of if this is where the students require support, some general supports that you might want to consider. And I wanted to look at just some quick examples of if a student requires support with phonemic awareness, some strategies, activities that you could consider. So thinking about like head, waist, shoulders. So if the word is sack, we're going sack. Sorry, you can't see me touch my toes. I realize that. Or perhaps you're outdoors, so you could be using hula hoops and they're jumping from sack. Or maybe you're talking about emotions in your class, and so you're having the students tell you the first sound of the word fier, ou joyeux, or calme. Or furieux. Sorry, I'm not very furieux. And I also wanted to just share a video of some other possibilities. Gonna fast forward.
Je veux que tu écoutes bien. OK? Alors, écoute. I, mets ensemble. Qu'est-ce que ça fait? Il. Très bien. Répète. I, il. Excellent. Un autre. Écoutez bien. Très bien. Répète. Elle. Excellent. OK, un autre. Oh, wow. Écoutez bien. Très bien. Maintenant, on va essayer 3 sons, d'accord? OK, écoutez bien.
Maybe it's tricky.
I.
Ami.
Très bien. OK, un autre. Bleu. Bleu, très bien. Maintenant, madame va faire une autre couleur, d'accord? Rose. Oh, trop facile.
Because it's a name.
Une autre couleur, d'accord? Jaune. Ok, écoute. Sac. Très bien. Oh, trop facile. Très bien. Très bien. Maintenant, on va faire 4 sons.
Oh no, that's so tricky.
Oh oui.
You're
OK.
tricky enough today.
Écoutez bien. I.
Tabby.
Oh, wow.
So I do want to take a moment and acknowledge that that video was filmed in 2022, and we have learned a great deal since then, but I'm so grateful to Julie and her students for opening themselves up to being filmed. And it's interesting because I know even we filmed something a year ago and already it's just we keep learning so quickly. And so video footage is really challenging to get just right as we keep learning, but also see the value in being able to use that. Now, if she were to do it today, I know because she's using, for example, sonograph in her class, she would likely choose words directly from the word list that are connected to what the students are learning about. So when we're thinking about principes alphabétiques et phonétiques de base, I think it's really important that we look at some of the resources that we have available to support that, thinking of the integrated mnemonics from ONlit that are available, as well as sonograph, and how we might be able to use those to reinforce those skills. I know also some of the tools that we find really helpful to reinforce this or to practice, and I really like that notion of perfected practice, is working with magnetic chips and wands and looking at that tap it, map it, graphic So we're making those connections between phonemes, graphemes, and letter formation, as well as the lancer et lire. The one really other great thing that we've found is that we can copy and paste the words from the lancer et lire into the games from the UFly game generator and access those games that are there. Just going to, when we're talking about, again, those basic phonics skills, look at what one class does as a small group. And I'm going to fast forward this to 508. There we are.
Quel son, quelle voyelle est-ce que tu entends dans le mot mur? Excellent, parfait. Est-ce que tu peux le faire avec le mot fille? Oui, c'est ça. Est-ce que tu es prêt pour le prochain? Oui. Ouais. C'est le mot le. Wow, tu es vite. Ok, c'est un peu plus difficile. Est-ce que tu peux essayer pour moi? Ok. C'est le mot porte. Wow, tu as entendu le O en porte? Wow. Oh.
So again, just using that example of the, working through a targeted skill. So thinking about what is important too is the progress monitoring piece. So really looking at that goal for that particular student or small group of students or for our whole class and monitoring the skill that we're teaching. So this is directly from reading assessment done right. So looking at monitoring the skill you're teaching, monitoring only one progress monitoring measure at a time, and then setting ambitious goals to close the gap. And it's interesting because I work with a lot of educators, and even sometimes it might be a grade 2 student is still working on first sound fluency. And so if that's where they're working, that's where we need to support them. We don't want to throw a student. I liken it to swimming because my son was an avid swimmer. I'm not going to throw a child into the deep end and expect them to do an IM if they're still working on, just that basic kicking. So really need to work on one skill and make sure that instruction is working. And I really want to connect to that piece specific to French immersion. So knowing that when they did the right to read, that one of the things that came out of it was knowing that the inquiry found that streaming happens in some ways. And knowing that includes placing students in special education classrooms where they do not receive appropriate interventions for their reading difficulties, or streaming them out of French immersion instead of providing them with accommodations and interventions so they can remain in the regular classroom or in French immersion. And I know sometimes there are systemic barriers that we need to consider and work through, but I think it's important that sometimes we address those challenging conversations and look at how we can support our students in immersion, because we also know of the opportunities that the French immersion program does provide for our students. And I do think that having those conversations with parents around what does the screener tell us? What is it? And knowing that there's so much more information about their child as a learner that is really important as far as moving them forward. So again, thinking about that progress monitoring, and if it's not working, how can we change our instruction, our group composition, the materials, and the length of the small group instruction, and knowing that doesn't always mean that we need to make it longer. Sometimes we may need to look at chunking it. And I know one of our interventionists was super excited to just share, because as the interventionists are working with the students, they're actually progress monitoring weekly, whereas I know many homeroom educators are striving for that bi-weekly, but looking at how within 1 week at a time, we're able to move a student so we're looking at, if you look at this, nombre de sons correct versus mots lus en entier, within 1 week at a time, moving them quite drastically through that. So I think if we could head into our questions-réponses à ce moment, and I do have some questions here, but I really want to open the floor to any questions that you might already have, but I thought I'd provide some just as a springboard for our conversation.